All right, so hopefully now in a few minutes everything comes together around this idea of an epiVerse. So an environment where multiple applications can be written and multiple backends can be deployed, and this ensemble works together as an ecosystem with a governance that is bottom-up and as described in the paper, that is or has been the limitation of distributed systems that don't scale well with regard to the governance, even if they scale well with regard to the programmatic interoperability. All right, with this in mind, so this is just a quick summary here. This has been the way we've loaded we've loaded the methods of the epiDonate SDK. We'll be doing it differently now, and I believe in a way that is much more interesting. So think about Donna as something we are now going to multiply by multiple instances of the SDK. So we have an example here at the end. So if you don't feel like opening the DevTools, which I highly recommend you do, and we'll go back there in a minute. So you can also experiment with these constructs here. So here's a little study here on the side. This is all interactive, so you can type away here or on the console, same thing. So they're all alive. And what you see here is the methods are being loaded as before. Then you have the module. The module is basically Donna in the other videos. We can set a connection for the module as a whole, but of course this doesn't let us set connections to multiple backends, and that's what the epiVerse idea is about. So we have here an example where we do something a little different, which is one of the methods returned in the module, along with get, post, and others, is the method deployment. And deployment is a prototypal function, or a prototypal class if you prefer object-oriented terminology. So when I create a new deployment, just use the syntax new mod deployment, and I target the backend. So I can target multiple backends. This is discussed here, together with the rest of the documentation. And you see the exact same code. See here? Of course, if you're in an asynchronous environment, you don't need to go through this. So I'll let you go through this on your own time. And instead, I'm going to focus on the simplest, most asynchronous implementation of this distribution. And I'm going to walk you through this link, and then we'll use it. So I'm creating a deployment, call it D3 in this case, new, now between brackets, await import the module. So all the module is here. And then there is a specific method in that module that turns out is a prototypal function. So I can instantiate it new deployment, and now I target the deployment. Modules in JavaScript are only loaded once, so in fact by loading this multiple times doesn't make any difference. But we could of course turn this whole construct into a mod like we do here. So this bit here is essentially Donna.deployment. What you see here, Donna.something else. Alright, so now let's open the DevTools. Recall that you have all of this going. So actually I'm going to copy this one. And I'd like you to lose the fear of making changes here. So I'm just going to paste it, then we'll look here. So here we go. And we say an unexpected token import. So we can't support all of the asynchronous solutions in the JSBin environment. That's why we do the import here. So let's do the same thing here. By the way, you see here that the other approach is, the other syntaxes all work. You see here D1 about sending a token to get the contents in a deployment with where that token exists. Object 1, donation@, there it is. And of course you also get it here, donation@ deployment 1, and here deployment 2. Where, because this is a token that is only available in deployment 1, in deployment 2 it shouldn't work, there should be an error message. And indeed, donation not at deployment 2, and no valid token provided. And you find the same thing here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so now remember that the await, the use of await will require the console of the browser. So let's do it here. And we are targeting epiSphere here and epiDonate. So I'm going to go back to the public deployment. And now we try it. So we have it here. See all the methods. within D3, and they are being imported from the modules in the code. This gets a bit intricate if you're not familiar with these patterns, but allow me to go just a little bit further on this. So if you go to methods, you see here the methods being defined as part of a module, function, 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 and at the end being exported. At line 80, you find this function called deployment. So deployment is going to be returned alongside with the other methods. And what this deployment does is that it creates its own instance, so you do new deployment, where you can define your own connectors, so your own backends. You can have multiple backends. But everything else, basically the prototypal object is borrowing the methods defined for the module already. This way you support both syntaxes. If you only care about a single deployment, a simple survey study, for example, you could stick with Donna. Otherwise, if you have multiple backends, you'd use this pattern we are discussing here under this name epiSphere. Note also another simplification in the distributed calling, distributed backend, is that we are no longer using JSON.parse to retrieve an object encoded as text. So for instance, if I go here and I type text, you get what you used to get with Donna, and then you parse it. So what you're probably guessing is that there's a second input argument in all of the get methods, either through instances or directly through the modules, and we're using text as a default value. If we use JSON as a default value, as we do by default when using this instantiation mechanism, so JSON, and you get the serialization by default. Again, if you're curious about the code, you'll see that in methods defined here, and when it gets to the prototypal function, the deployment function, we are basically borrowing all of the methods with a couple of changes for get and post, which are the ones that call the API, where we specify that the format by default is JSON. Of course, you can change it to text and parse as before. All right, so I think I'll stop here. We should probably get some data. So D3 is here. So you believe all is working. Everything else will be working, the get, sets, and so on. So I'm borrowing a token from deployment 1 that targets the same backend. So we now have two deployments targeting the same backend. And of course you get a promise. Let's wait for the promise and assign the contents to X. And there we are. So all the other methods will be used in the same fashion. Before we go, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the discussion module here. If you want to go beyond discussions and create issues that you think should be addressed by the code, please feel welcome to use it here. And of course, you're more than welcome to fork the code. It's all open source, public domain. Make changes, and if you think those changes benefit from being merged back into the main code, make a pull request, and we are happy to review it. All right, thank you, bye now.